Welcome to this explainer. We're going to methodically break down the precise threats facing coastal biodiversity, so you walk away with the exact factual baseline required to tackle environmental law.
Before we dive into any regulatory solutions, we really have to grasp one vital truth about what's at stake here and why it actually matters. Coastal biodiversity sits exactly where human development pressure is at its absolute highest. This makes these incredibly productive ecosystems disproportionately fragile. That is our core tension.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the baseline stakes, move into habitat destruction and pollution, then tackle overexploitation and climate change, followed by invasives and coastal erosion. After that, we'll apply all of this to some India-specific case studies, and finally wrap it up with a comprehensive lecture recap.
Okay, Section 1, the Coastal Biodiversity Baseline.
When we talk about the coastal baseline, we're looking at 6 major ecosystems: mangroves, coral reefs, seagrass meadows, salt marshes, estuaries, and mudflats. Now, these environments are incredibly productive engines of marine life, but they're uniquely vulnerable for one simple reason. They sit right on the edge of human expansion. They are the exact geographic overlap between where marine life breeds and where human beings build.
Section 2, Habitat Destruction and Pollution. Let's start with a plain language explanation of our very first threat. It's basically people building things right over natural spaces. The precise legal and scientific term for this is habitat destruction. It means direct physical loss through coastal development. We're talking about ports, tourism infrastructure, land reclamation, and aquaculture. Think about shrimp farming, for example. It is the single biggest driver of mangrove clearing globally because artificial ponds are carved directly out of the natural forest. And this brings us right back to our core rule. Direct physical loss through coastal development is the primary driver of habitat destruction.
Our second threat is pollution, and what's crucial to understand here is how we classify the problem. When analyzing pollution, the source requires us to cleanly divide the threat into land-based and sea-based categories. Land-based pollution includes things like agricultural runoff, sewage, industrial effluent, and plastic waste. Sea-based pollution, on the other hand, includes oil spills, ship-generated waste, and ballast water discharge. By categorizing the origin point like this, regulators can target the exact industry responsible.
Let's look a little closer at one specific form of land-based pollution: agricultural runoff. In plain language, fertilizer washes off farms, flows into the ocean, and causes algae to just explode in growth. But when that massive amount of algae eventually dies, its decomposition strips the surrounding water of oxygen, literally suffocating everything else. The precise scientific and legal term for this process is eutrophication, and it results in the creation of marine dead zones.
Moving on to Section 3, Overexploitation and Climate Change.
Our third major threat is overexploitation. Now, overexploitation isn't just about catching too many fish. It includes highly destructive extraction practices. Think of bottom trawling, which literally drags heavy nets across the seafloor, ripping up everything in its path. It also includes dynamite and cyanide fishing. And it even extends beyond fish to the unsustainable harvesting of mangrove wood and breaking off pieces of coral for the curio trade, just so they can be sold as tourist souvenirs.
The fourth threat is climate change, which basically compounds all of our other pressures. Under climate change, ocean warming triggers a very specific, devastating chain reaction in coral reefs. In simple terms, when the water gets too hot, corals spit out the tiny plants living inside them that provide their food and their color, basically leaving them to starve. The precise terminology you absolutely must know is this: thermal stress forces corals to expel their symbiotic algae, known exactly as zooxanthellae, which causes fatal coral bleaching, and prolonged bleaching kills the reef entirely.
Beyond just temperature, carbon emissions alter the very chemistry of the water. When the ocean absorbs too much carbon dioxide, the water becomes more acidic, literally dissolving the ability of marine life to build their shells. We call this ocean acidification. The precise definition is that rising CO2 absorption lowers seawater pH, directly impairing the ability of corals and shellfish to build their calcium carbonate skeletons.
And this brings us to the final climate impacts, which are purely physical. Sea level rise acts slowly. It submerges low-lying habitats and drives saltwater intrusion deep into freshwater-dependent mangrove zones, slowly poisoning them. In sharp contrast, intensified storms act rapidly. They serve as a blunt instrument of direct physical destruction, tearing entire ecosystems apart overnight.
Section 4, Invasives and Coastal Erosion. Our fifth threat introduces what is essentially biological warfare into the ecosystem. because massive cargo ships take on seawater in one part of the world to balance their weight and then discharge it in another. They inadvertently transport foreign organisms. We call these invasive alien species. These are non-native species, introduced mainly via ballast water discharge or hull fouling, that aggressively outcompete local native species for resources.
To ensure we memorize the regulatory baseline for this specific sea-based threat, we need to look at international maritime law. Note that the International Maritime Organization designed the Ballast Water Management Convention, which was drafted in 2004. This treaty officially entered into force in 2017, and it was specifically built to stop the spread of these invasive alien species.
Our sixth and final threat is coastal erosion. The fundamental rule here is that while erosion is partly driven by natural coastal processes, it is heavily worsened by human intervention. Specifically, human sand mining and the construction of infrastructure, things like groins, breakwaters, and even upstream dams, severely disrupt natural sediment transport. They literally starve the coastline of the sand it needs to rebuild itself.
All right, Section 5, India-specific case studies. First, let's look at the Sundarbans. This is the world's largest mangrove forest which India shares with Bangladesh. It faces compounding pressures from sea level rise, increasing cyclone intensity, and human encroachment. Second, we look at India's major coral reefs. The reefs in the Gulf of Mannar, Gulf of Kutch, Lakshadweep, and the Andaman and Nicobar Islands suffered directly from the devastating 2016 and 2020 global thermal bleaching events we discussed earlier.
Now let's treat our third illustration, Chilika Lake, as a formal case study. Here are the facts. Chilika Lake in Odisha is Asia's largest brackish water lagoon. The issue was that severe siltation and reduced salinity nearly caused the total collapse of its ecosystem. The restorative action? A massive engineering intervention. The lake was substantially restored by reopening its seamouth to reestablish natural tidal flow. So what does this matter? Well, the significance of this case is that it stands as a genuine conservation success story for a designated Ramsar site, proving that ecological decline can in fact be reversed.
Section 6, Comprehensive Lecture Recap. Let's lock this in.
In teaching order, we covered 6 major threats. First, habitat destruction, driven by development and aquaculture. Second, land and sea pollution, which causes eutrophication and those marine dead zones. Third, overexploitation through destructive fishing and harvesting. Fourth, the compounding climate change threats of thermal bleaching via the loss of zooxanthellae and ocean acidification. Fifth, invasive alien species, regulated by the Ballast Water Management Convention. And sixth, coastal erosion, worsened by sand mining and sediment-disrupting infrastructure. We then applied those exact threats to 3 specific cases: the Sundarbans battling immense mangrove pressures, the specific Indian coral reefs affected by thermal stress in 2016 and 2020, and the successful tidal restoration of Chilika Lake, which solved a devastating salinity crisis. Now that you've completely mastered the underlying environmental problems and the precise terminology for each, you are perfectly prepared for the vital final question. With the problems clearly named, how exactly do legal instruments like the CBD, Ramsar, MARPOL, and India's domestic laws actually respond to protect these ecosystems? That is the exact question we're going to answer next time.